So hello, everyone. My name is Kellyn Wagner Ramsdell, and today I'm going to be speaking about what we can learn from ransomware and how to learn it without the threat of financial ruin. So the idea here, and I've given a version of this briefing before, and I've had folks come back to me and say, so it's basically never let a good disaster go to waste. Yes, but also no. The real idea and the real takeaway here, and what I want you to be thinking about, is how we can take these lessons we are learning from ransomware and learn them without this threat of a major attack that risks our business. So as I'm speaking today, I really want you to be thinking through how you can action these lessons learned without actually going through a ransomware attack. And so with that, diving right in. So agenda, no good PowerPoint doesn't have an agenda. So I'm going to give a brief talk about my experience with ransomware, why I feel confident speaking about this. And then this isn't really a straightforward how-to. This is a let's talk through what we learned, and I'm going to do it in the form of some arguments I make about my experiences with ransomware. And then I'm going to talk through some opportunities for defenders. And this is really your opportunity to get thinking and to get prepared for, all right, I haven't gone through a ransomware attack, but let's act as though I have, and let's make these changes. So why am I talking about ransomware? I've worked a lot of ransomware in my career. In fact, my career has largely followed the trajectory of ransomware. I started out in cyber threat intelligence, working with law enforcement in Arizona when we were still seeing ransomware impacting individuals and small businesses. The old FBI, you access something you shouldn't have on your computer, pay us a couple $100. Started there and followed it to when ransomware was absolutely starting to destroy state and local governments in 2018 and 2019, moving all the way into today where we see it having this major impact on multinational corporations and critical infrastructure organizations. So I've worked a lot of ransomware. You can see the state scoop map here on the bottom of some publicly disclosed ransomware attacks impacting state and local government. Had my hand in a lot of these while supporting a national network of cybercrime analysts. I've also done some work assessing the risks of ransomware to defense contractors while supporting the DoD. And I'm currently a cyber threat intelligence analyst at MITRE. So we do attack, and we do all sorts of work about how we can take our lessons learned from attacks and use them for a threat-informed defense. That being said, all these views are my own. These are my experiences that I've had in the course of working at all these places. So none of these are my employer's views. So diving right in, argument number one. Ransomware can have a net positive effect on victimized organizations. Now, I'll caveat here a little and save myself a little from anybody who's ready to jump and say, absolutely not. Can. Ransomware can certainly be devastating, and some organizations are unable to recover. I've seen plenty of small businesses who simply can't come back from a ransomware attack. However, organizations that are positioned well and have good plans, and even sometimes that are lucky, ransomware can have a net positive impact. So let's think through why that is. So first and foremost, and this is really in the never let a good disaster go to waste, the entire organization focuses on or perhaps becomes aware of security and their role in security. I worked some ransomware engagements where we had users who were suddenly terrified. The phishing tests that they had to do in their organization were annoying, but suddenly they were terrified that none of their computers were working, they couldn't do their jobs, and they were wondering if it was because they had clicked a link. Suddenly, all of that training and all of that work they had done became relevant because they saw their role in protecting the organization. Now, it's great that your users are aware of security, but what about the actual decision makers? Yes, they have no choice but to be confronted with the realities of what security means for how a business operates, from how you actually accomplish your business objectives. So you have the spotlight, and it's yours to make of it what you will if you are in the security space. Now, with that spotlight, we see a lot of organizations, once they're victimized by a ransomware attack, they're able to implement long-term change in a relatively short interval. Whereas before, maybe they were planning and maybe they had buy-in from their leadership to get and implement multi-factor authentication over the span of a couple years. You're in the middle of a ransomware attack and you say, hey, our best way forward is to start implementing multi-factor authentication for our users. That's your opportunity. I worked with one organization. Multi-factor authentication was in their 2-year plan and they were going to slowly implement it over time. And due to it wasn't a ransomware attack, it was actually a broad-scale compromise of their email infrastructure. But due to that incident, they were able to get two-factor implemented organization-wide in 6 weeks. So that vastly shortened their timeline and greatly increased the overall security of the organization. And that wouldn't have been possible without that incident because, again, that incident made security relevant. It made them all understand the value. But okay, those two arguments, those are both things that we've all seen. It's like, yes, everyone's looking at you. You can do things with that. But what else do we learn from ransomware that can help us go forward and can make it a positive experience for an organization? Well, ransomware can drive a crown jewels assessment and other best practices. So the crown jewels assessment, what matters most to your organization? Well, you've just been through a ransomware attack. You have just discovered what your crown jewels are because you've had to recover them first and foremost. You've discovered they were down. They were the priorities to getting your business operational. Again, you've just seen them. Okay, so now let's workshop that. Let's understand how could we get those better secured? How can we make sure that those come back up faster? How do we make sure those systems and those crown jewels are resilient? Maybe they don't go down in the first place because we have redundancies and because we've built resilient crown jewels. Well, ransomware can start you along that process. So when we stop and think, okay, learning the lessons of ransomware without ransomware, all right, let's look at our crown jewels. Let's know what those are before we are hit. And let's also look at other best practices. What's happening and how do we secure our organization? How do we tie our detections and our defenses to what attackers are realistically doing? Well, we've just seen what attackers can realistically do to greatly disrupt our operations. Let's build defenses for that and let's keep that process going forward. There's going to be a lot of talks, Purple Hats, I think, that are really hitting on that idea in particular. Another thing some people don't realize with a ransomware attack is that this is potentially your opportunity to remove technical debt. So I love the O'Reilly comics. You know, the guy who wrote this is gone. It's running everywhere. There's no comments, no documentation, but 20 tickets. We've all had that in our enterprise of there's this thing that we're all using. It's not the best. It's what we've got. It's old. It's cobbled together. It shouldn't be running anymore. Well, you might not be able to get that back when ransomware hits, depending on the state of your backups. You might see old legacy systems that it's like, all right, ransomware is your opportunity, maybe because you have the budgetary move, because you have that spotlight on security, or maybe it's just, all right, we can't rebuild this because the guy who built it is gone. So ransomware presents that opportunity, I think, better than anything else to remove that technical debt and provide a way forward for an organization. And then finally, and there are other lessons to be learned, of course, but finally, ransomware attacks can lead to improved processes. When you're doing your root cause analysis to understand how you were compromised, to understand how the threat actors got in, how they were able to impact your business, you're looking at processes that can be improved. That root cause analysis, that lessons learned from a ransomware attack is one of the most valuable things you can ever do. You know, did it get in because of due diligence in a merger and acquisition? Maybe due diligence wasn't looking at cyber threat intelligence and wasn't looking at the risk from a technical perspective of a merger or an acquisition. Maybe it's how you interact with vendors and your connections between vendors. Do you need a different kind of firewall in between them? Do you need new processes? Well, your root cause analysis of why you got hit with ransomware and how they were able to get in, that's going to reveal that. So when we think through, okay, like we've been through, let's learn from ransomware without going through it. Can you workshop your processes? Maybe processes that your cyber threat intelligence or your security teams never see because they're sitting over in HR or they're sitting over in acquisitions or they're sitting over in the risk management department? Can you sit down with those teams and walk through those processes as though you're doing a lessons learned from a ransomware attack? All right, we're imagining that this process was how we were compromised. All right, let's walk through it. Let's see how we can improve it and make ourselves more secure, not just from a technical perspective, but from a process perspective and from a human perspective. So there's a lot of opportunities there and a lot of chances to move forward. So I'm going to go into my next argument, which is also kind of leading to how ransomware can have a net positive effect. And that argument is that there's no stress test of equivalent diagnostic value as a ransomware attack. Now, what do I mean by this? Nothing is going to test you more than a ransomware attack because it's going to break things you didn't know could break. I had an organization, they were begging for help in the middle of a ransomware attack. And every resource to help them was calling back and leaving voicemails and saying, hey, we're here to help, call us back. And nobody was getting a call back. Well, what we discovered was that organization, they managed their own voicemail server and it was encrypted. They couldn't access any voicemails. So we were back to using text messages and fax machines to communicate with them. But they didn't know, we didn't know. How were we going to know that? Because that's not something you test. You can't take down all your systems. You can't wreck everything to find out what breaks when. And so ransomware gives you that opportunity to break everything, whether you want to or not. Now, further going into this argument, let's talk through some case studies beyond the poor voicemail server. The Kronos ransomware attack. Now, we all saw this in the headlines last winter. 17 December, the attack occurred around then of Kronos. Now, they manage time systems and payroll for a lot of big companies and a lot of small companies and some, my old wheelhouse, state and local governments. So they're really important around the holidays in particular for making sure people get paid so families can have a nice Christmas. Well, ransomware hit. And it took them more than a month to get a full system restore. And there were reports into February of their clients saying, our people haven't been paid. We don't know. These devices broke. We didn't get this data. Paychecks haven't been cut because the time data was corrupted. Now, my heart goes out to the folks at Kronos who worked this, if there are any listening. That's got to be brutal because there's no way, or there's very few ways for organizations to test these systems to take them down because they're mission critical. Now, I've given a version of this briefing before, and I had somebody who chimed in that, oh, actually, we were able to test what happens when you break things by saying it was to test the resiliency requirements of our system. Fantastic. So maybe we can get leadership buy-in if we test these systems and say it's for resiliency, not for security. It's for making sure we're redundant in case of a power outage, because a power outage can break these things. We've all had that moment of, oh, hey, a power outage is taking out a major network. Our bosses are wondering if it's a cyber attack, and we're like, we're fairly certain it was a backhoe and somebody didn't call before they started digging, but maybe it was a advanced ransomware attack that's about to ransom us for a few $1 million. Give us a minute. But so these things go down. And how do we know and how do we test the impacts of connections being broken? Now that gets to my second example here. I've worked with one organization, and they had, well, a larger umbrella organization, but there were two critical nodes in this organization. And they had absolutely no idea what dropping the connection between those two organizations, what the effect of that would be. And they had no way to test it. Leadership had no desire to break very critical systems. This was in a critical infrastructure organization. They had no way of telling. So they had started to build some data flows and some process flows to understand really functionally what the connection between those two organizations meant, but they could not test that without taking down the network. At least that was their thinking. So for them, the only way to fully know what ransomware is going to break is to take that down or find new avenues of testing. So that's where we really get to the meat here of how can organizations learn these lessons that ransomware provides without a catastrophic ransomware attack. Okay, maybe you can share peer stories. You can understand what others have gone through. I've made a career out of sharing peer stories, and I think sometimes facilitating, peer support groups of, hey, I've got a sysadmin over here who just went through ransomware. This sysadmin's starting their ransomware response process. Let's meet and have coffee and share some best practices. But I think one of the keys that we often overlook, it has to be sharing peer stories. So if we're trying to get our C-suite engaged, we need to make sure the peer story is coming from a C-suite that went through a ransomware attack. If we're trying to get your tier one SOC folks to be able to action these things, they need to be hearing from their fellows that have sat in their seat and are doing what they're doing. But sharing peer stories is only going to go so far. I mean, we have all these headlines, we have all these concerns, and it's still not stopping everything. So I think that also gets to the next point of, we need to be providing threat-informed, risk-level information to multiple levels of users. What are threat actors actually doing, and how do I, as a threat intelligence analyst, communicate that to the appropriate level? Because how I'm communicating to the SOC is very different from how I'm going to communicate to the risk management folks, to the acquisitions folks, to the HR folks, and to the C-suite. And even different roles within the C-suite, how I talk to legal and what information I give and what information they want on this threat, that's going to be potentially different than, or certainly different than what the chief information officer, the CIO might want. So it's understanding, okay, who needs to make decisions in a ransomware attack? Who needs to make these decisions before a ransomware attack? And how do we get them the information that, hey, this is a threat, this is what it means, and this is what it could do to us? And make no mistake, it's Threat Intel's job to be talking to all of these varied groups and really helping them understand, hey, this is coming for us. So often we share peer stories, but organizations are like, no, there's no reason to hit me. There is. They're going to go for you. And so helping every level understand what that realistically means and how they can be prepared is key. One of the tried and true and old methods is exercises. Let's run exercises. Let's see what happens if we respond. Let's test our response processes from a personnel perspective and from a technical perspective. Tabletop exercises get a lot of knocks. I love tabletop exercises just because it might be one of the first times you have people from legal meeting with people from the SOC, or maybe even the SOC meeting with physical security. These are teams that you're probably going to be meeting for the first time in the middle of an incident. Well, tabletop gives you that opportunity to meet, exchange phone numbers, know each other ahead of time. Next point, I've mentioned this before, crown jewels assessment. Know what matters most in your organization and know exactly how it's defended and how you can move forward. The crown jewels assessment, and of course, keep that crown jewels assessment very secure. That needs to be one of your most well-secured documents because otherwise it's just a roadmap for your adversaries. But knowing what's important, knowing what you have to be able to get up fast, and testing that. When we look at the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, their contingency planning documentation, this is what you need for disaster planning too. You need to know what's most critical. You need to know how to make it resilient. And so we can justify all that without the specifics of security. Let's look at natural disasters and be like, all right, we need to test these critical things and test how fast we can get them back up and running. Next space, and this is a big part of this conference, is penetration tests, adversary emulation, red teaming. Let's test what we can get to. Let's test what we can break in a safe way, but using the actual real world techniques adversaries are going to use to hit us, because that helps us make the argument. If we're using some advanced state-sponsored level technique, organizations that are going to be like, yeah, you owned us, but they're not going to ever actually hit us. But no, if we can say, hey, this is what Wizard Spider is doing with this ransomware gang to compromise organizations, and we can say, and this is how their techniques worked against you, and this is what these techniques broke, we can start to learn these lessons without giving the threat actors an opportunity to make a multi-million-dollar payday. We can also do resiliency assessments. I've mentioned this a couple times, the idea of let's say this isn't about security. This is about how good we are at getting our critical assets back up and running, regardless of what has happened. Ransomware, natural disaster, the backhoe that didn't call before it started digging. These are all things we need to understand are a risk to our business. But understanding, again, our takedown time and our recovery time is going to be key to reducing the overall impact of any one of these disasters. And then just overall being prepared in case a ransomware attack occurs. You might do the best defenses and it just gets through because of luck, because of a small error here or there, or because these ransomware groups are very skilled and they're very persistent. So just knowing what you're going to do when it happens, know what your out-of-band communications are, know how to contact your cyber insurance provider if you have one. And I mean the 24/7, 365 number, not just the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday number. Know who to call in government. Are you going to get law enforcement assistance? Are you going to be working with CISA? Who are you going to get your help? And know that ahead of time. What's your communication plan going to be? How are you going to talk to your clients? Your infrastructure might be down. Do you have out-of-band communication options for talking to your clients and customers? So these are all things that if you think through ahead of time and you answer, if all of these other things haven't worked and you do get hit with ransomware, having that preparedness is going to make your ransomware experience a lot better and reduce the overall impact to your organization. And then question mark. There's a lot more ways to learn these lessons. And I really hope I hear from some of the folks who've listened to this. I hope you learn from other presentations at this conference and start thinking, okay, what can I implement and what can I action in my organization today? With that, I'll thank you. I will be looking in chat and answering any questions.